No one could survive Victoria Harrington's fury. Her drivers lasted days, not months. She believed everyone around her was incompetent, until Samuel Hills appeared. Calm, intelligent, and handsome, he wasn't afraid of her temper. Then he solved a problem her top executives couldn't even understand. Suddenly, respect turned into something far more dangerous. Could the woman who ruled an empire fall for a driver? What happens next? Their story will leave you breathless. Before we proceed, please subscribe to Boundless Echoes for more interesting stories like what you are about to see. In New York City, power did not whisper. It roared. It glimmered from glass towers and penthouse balconies. It moved through polished boardrooms and black SUVs with tinted windows. It lived in decisions that could shift markets before lunch. And at the very top of one of those towers stood Victoria Harrington, 32 years old, self-made billionaire, founder and CEO of Harrington Global Systems, and utterly impossible to please. "You're late." The words were quiet, deadly quiet. The driver swallowed. It was traffic on. There is always traffic in Manhattan. Her eyes didn't leave her tablet. You are employed to anticipate what is predictable. The man gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I left early." "You didn't leave early enough." Silence. The SUV eased to a stop beneath the overhang of Harrington Global's headquarters. Victoria stepped out without waiting for him to open the door. "Alicia will send you your final paycheck," she said flatly. He blinked. "Final? You lasted 26 days." The doors of the tower closed behind her before he could respond. Upstairs, on the 48th floor, Alicia Grant looked up as Victoria strode in. "Driver's gone," Victoria said. Alicia didn't flinch. 26. 26. Alicia made a quiet note. In the break room, someone sighed. "I lost the pool again." Another voice muttered, "No one's breaking a month." Victoria Harrington had built her company from nothing but code and conviction. At 24, she launched a logistics software that outperformed competitors by 40%. By 28, she had expanded into predictive supply chain AI. By 32, Harrington Global Systems was valued in the billions. She did not tolerate mediocrity. She did not tolerate excuses. And she absolutely did not tolerate incompetence. The drivers were the easiest to replace. They were variables. And Victoria hated variables. The following Monday, HR escorted the next candidate upstairs. "Samuel Hills," the recruiter said cautiously. Victoria didn't stand. He did not appear intimidated. Tall, composed, navy suit tailored cleanly across broad shoulders. Calm eyes that scanned the office once and then settled on her without challenge, without submission. "You understand this position is strictly transportation?" Victoria asked. "Yes. You won't be participating in meetings." "I understand. You will be on call at irregular hours." "I expect that." She studied him. No nervous shifting. No overeager smiling. "Why do you want this job?" "Because I'm excellent at anticipating patterns." Her brow lifted slightly. "You're a driver." "I am many things. Driving happens to be one of them." The room went still. Alicia blinked. Victoria leaned back. Most applicants tried to impress her. He wasn't trying. He was stating. "You start tomorrow," she said. Samuel arrived 15 minutes early. He had already memorized her schedule. He had reviewed traffic projections across Manhattan. He had calculated alternate routes for 3 possible delays. Victoria entered the SUV without greeting. "Wall Street," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't need it. He merged smoothly into traffic, adjusting lanes before congestion built. Victoria noticed. She said nothing. Halfway through the drive, she spoke sharply. "Take the FDR. There's a 12-minute slowdown due to construction. West Side Highway will be faster." Her eyes flicked up. "Are you questioning me?" "No. I'm updating you." Silence. She watched the GPS. He was correct. They arrived 3 minutes earlier than projected. Over the next week, Victoria escalated. Sudden route changes. Last-minute location swaps. Deliberate silence followed by abrupt criticism. You brake too softly. He adjusted. You're driving too smoothly. I can't feel lane changes. He altered pressure. Don't adjust temperature without asking. Yes, ma'am. But when she accused him unfairly, you missed the turn. I didn't. You changed the address mid-route. He did not apologize for what wasn't his fault. He simply showed her the timestamp. Calm. Unbothered. Unbreakable. And that unsettled her more than mistakes ever had. On the 10th day, Victoria stepped into a boardroom thick with tension. Mark Reynolds, her COO, looked pale. The San Francisco integration rollout is unstable, he said. Victoria froze. How unstable? We're seeing data sync failures between legacy servers and the new AI layer. That's impossible. We stress tested. Apparently not enough. She turned icy. Fix it. We're trying. She walked out before the meeting ended. In the elevator, she dialed another executive. If this rollout fails, heads will roll with it. Back in the SUV, Victoria vented through a headset. They had one job. One. Samuel listened. He did not interrupt. They can't isolate the synchronization issue. They're guessing. Her jaw clenched. Guessing costs millions. Samuel's gaze remained on the road. Synchronization. Legacy architecture. AI bridge layer. He understood the vocabulary. He understood the flaw forming beneath it. But he said nothing. Not yet. 3 days later, the system collapsed. Completely. Clients across multiple states reported data corruption. Shipments halted. Investors began calling. Stock prices dipped before market close. Inside Harrington Global, executives argued in overlapping panic. It's the cloud migration. No, it's the API bridge. We need outside consultants. Victoria slammed her palm on the table. I will not pay outsiders to fix internal incompetence. Silence fell. Find the root cause. No one moved. No one knew. That evening, Victoria slid into the back seat of the SUV. She looked exhausted. For the first time since Samuel had met her. She looked human. They're useless, she muttered. Samuel hesitated. Not out of fear. Out of calculation. May I say something? She didn't look up. That depends. Is it intelligent? Yes. Her eyes lifted slowly to the rearview mirror. He met her gaze evenly. If the failure began during parallel migration, then the legacy architecture likely conflicts with the AI processing queue. It would create a synchronization loop. That would corrupt incoming real-time data. Silence. The city noise faded beneath it. Victoria's expression sharpened. Pull over. He did. She leaned forward. Explain that. For the next 15 minutes, Samuel outlined what the executives had failed to articulate. Precise. Structured. Confident. Not speculative. Certain. Victoria didn't interrupt. When he finished, the air inside the SUV felt different. Charged. You're a driver, she said quietly. Yes. That explanation wasn't guesswork. No. Her eyes narrowed. Who are you, Mr. Hills? He held her gaze. Someone who doesn't believe in incompetence. Only in misalignment. For the first time since hiring him, Victoria Harrington was not in control of the room. And she knew it. She leaned back slowly. Come to the office tomorrow morning, she said. As my driver? She paused. Her eyes never left his in the mirror. No. Something had shifted. The woman who fired everyone had just met the first man she couldn't immediately categorize. And somewhere beneath her precision, curiosity sparked. Because if Samuel Hills wasn't just a driver, then she had underestimated him. And Victoria Harrington hated underestimating anything. The next morning, Samuel arrived at Harrington Global precisely at 7:45 a.m., 5 minutes before the start of Victoria's day. He stood at the entrance of the sleek glass tower, hands clasped loosely behind his back, calm and composed. The doorman glanced at him curiously. This was not unusual. Drivers rarely arrived early. But there was something in the way he carried himself that made them pause. Alicia Gran appeared, tablet in hand. Mr. Hills, she's already on the 48th floor. She said you're to wait in the car until she's ready. Samuel inclined his head politely. Thank you, Ms. Grant. He walked to the black SUV, opened the door for himself, and settled in. The city buzzed around him, oblivious to the tension coiled inside that tower. Victoria stepped out of the building 10 minutes later, hair perfectly in place, tailored navy suit sharp as a blade. She didn't glance at Samuel. She walked around to the passenger side, expecting him to open the door. He didn't. Instead, he held it open without a word. Her eyes flicked up at him briefly. Not with anger, not with approval. Just acknowledgement. You know the route, she said, sliding in. Yes, ma'am. Her tone carried all the weight of Manhattan authority, but Samuel's steady voice matched it in quiet precision. Traffic predictions suggest West Side Highway for your first appointment. It's faster by 6 minutes than the FDR, even accounting for morning congestion. Her eyes narrowed. And if I want to take the FDR? Then we'll take it. But it will cost you 6 minutes. She didn't respond immediately. Samuel's calm confidence unnerved her more than the usual excuses from other drivers ever had. Over the next few days, Samuel did not just drive. He observed the way Victoria interacted with her executives, the cadence of her speech when she was frustrated, the subtle micro-expressions when something wasn't as she expected. He learned which buttons not to press. But he also noticed patterns no one else did. One afternoon, as he drove her from a meeting in Midtown back to headquarters, he caught snippets of her phone conversation through the car's hands-free system. Mark, she was saying, voice tight with controlled fury. The API migration is failing again. The system is corrupting live data. How is that possible? Mark Reynolds stammered. We were troubleshooting. It's complex. Complex. A polite way of saying, we have no clue. Samuel kept his voice low. If the failure is at the integration queue, it could be a conflict between the legacy servers and the new AI algorithms. It's a common oversight in multi-node parallel processing. Victoria's hand paused on the steering wheel. She hadn't realized he was listening. What did you just say? Samuel glanced at her through the rearview mirror, calm as ever. A possible cause for the failure you're dealing with. I can explain further if you'd like. She stared at him. For a moment, the cold mask cracked. Curiosity. Something rare. Something dangerous. I didn't hire you to consult, she said sharply. You didn't hire me to fail either, he replied evenly. By the end of the week, Samuel had become more than a driver in Victoria's eyes, but she wouldn't admit it. She tested him in ways no one else dared, changing routes mid-drive and pretending the GPS had issues. Speaking sharply about trivial matters just to provoke a reaction. Criticizing his timing, his braking, even the air conditioning in the car. And he didn't flinch. Not once. You're too calm, she muttered one afternoon as he delivered her to an off-site meeting. Better calm than panicked, he replied. She stared at him. There was no arrogance, no false humility, just measured certainty. It was unsettling. 3 days later, a notification pinged her phone. The San Francisco office was in chaos. Data corruption, the message read. Shipment delays across 5 states. API bridge failed. Victoria's chest tightened. She called an emergency board meeting. The executives fumbled. Engineers argued. The COO looked like a man about to vomit in his suit. No one could explain the problem. She hung up, furious, and slid into the SUV. Samuel was waiting. Calm. Precise. Observant. They have no clue what went wrong, she said, voice tight with frustration. I might, Samuel said quietly. She looked at him. Not incredulous. Not amused. Just cautious. Explain, she demanded. For the next 20 minutes, Samuel articulated the problem. Step by step, precise, clear, logical. He outlined the likely cause, the failure chain, and proposed a mitigation strategy that even her engineers hadn't considered. Victoria listened in stunned silence. When he finished, she exhaled slowly. You're a driver, she said, more statement than question. Yes, he replied calmly. And you just solved what my entire executive team could not. Yes, he repeated, tone even unflustered. Her eyes narrowed. She leaned back, processing the impossible. Who are you, Samuel Hills? I'm someone who doesn't believe in incompetence, he said simply. Only in misalignment. Her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, Victoria Harrington felt uncertain. Samuel didn't move immediately to the office. He waited for her to decide. When she finally spoke, voice low but commanding, she said, "Come to the office tomorrow morning." "As my driver?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "No," she said, eyes locked on his in the mirror. "As someone I need to understand." And that was all the invitation he needed. For the first time, Victoria Harrington met a man she could not categorize. And she hated not knowing. The next morning, Samuel Hills arrived at Harrington Global before sunrise, as always. The city's streets were slick with early February drizzle, the skyscrapers gleaming faintly in the fog. He walked past the doorman with quiet confidence, his shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. He wasn't just a man who drove. He was a man who noticed everything. Alicia Grant, waiting with her tablet, looked up. "Mr. Hills, she's already on the 48th floor. She expects you to wait in the car." "I understand," Samuel said calmly, and moved toward the black SUV parked at the curb. Inside, the interior smelled faintly of leather and polished wood. He adjusted the rearview mirror, checked the mirrors, and settled in, hands resting lightly on his knees. He didn't fidget. He didn't shift. He simply waited. At 7:55 a.m., Victoria Harrington appeared in the lobby, impeccably dressed, hair flawless. She did not look at Samuel as she approached. She didn't need to. She had already made up her mind about him. Yet something about him unsettled her, his calm, steady gaze that did not waver, even under her scrutiny. "You know the route," she said, opening the door. "Yes, ma'am," Samuel replied. "You're confident," she said as she slid into the back seat, voice tight. "Confidence is not arrogance," he said smoothly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. No one had ever spoken to her that way. Not her board. Not her assistants. Certainly not a driver. She exhaled, leaning back, and let him drive. Over the next few days, Samuel didn't just drive. He watched. He noticed how Victoria interacted with her staff. The micro-expressions when she caught someone in a lie. The subtle exhale of relief when a meeting ended without disaster. The small tremor in her hand when a project she had poured herself into faltered. He noticed patterns in her decisions, in her reactions, in her quiet insistence that everyone around her was either incompetent or expendable. But more than noticing, he adapted. He anticipated her unspoken commands. He never flinched under criticism. He adjusted when she tested him, not with excuses, not with emotion, but with precision. On a gray Wednesday morning, Victoria received the first alert. The San Francisco branch's system migration had failed, and live data across 5 states was corrupted. Shipments were delayed. Clients were panicking. Investors were calling. Inside the elevator on the way to the emergency board meeting, Victoria's hands tightened around the railing. She was normally calm, unflappable, but this was serious. Millions were at stake, and no one in her office could immediately identify the root cause. Samuel observed her quietly. He didn't speak. Not yet. In the conference room, chaos reigned. Engineers argued over technical jargon, executives shouted over one another, and Mark Reynolds, the COO, looked pale and helpless. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. "Enough! Fix it now." No one moved. Her jaw clenched. "I will not pay outside consultants for internal incompetence. Someone find the root cause, or heads will roll." After the meeting, Victoria stormed into the SUV, hair slightly disheveled from tension, eyes dark with frustration. "They're useless," she muttered. Samuel spoke carefully, not to provoke, but to offer insight. "May I say something?" She didn't turn. "Depends. Is it intelligent?" "Yes," he replied. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "Go on." He explained the problem clearly. A synchronization conflict between the legacy servers and the new AI integration layer. a rare, subtle flaw in parallel processing that even her engineers had overlooked. Victoria stared. He spoke with authority but without arrogance. Step by step, he detailed the flaw, the consequences, and a mitigation strategy that could prevent total collapse. When he finished, the car was silent except for the hum of the engine. "You're a driver," she said softly. "Yes. And yet you just solved what my entire executive team couldn't." "Yes," he said again, unflustered. Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, Victoria Harrington faced uncertainty. Curiosity prickled at her, dangerous and unwelcome. "Who are you, Samuel Hills?" she asked. "I'm someone who doesn't believe in incompetence." "Only misalignment," he said. Her lips pressed together. She leaned back, studying him. A driver who thought like this? Who challenged her assumptions calmly. It was unsettling, exciting, dangerous. The next morning, Victoria summoned Samuel to the office. Not as a driver, not as a delivery boy. "I need you to come upstairs," she said. "As my driver?" he asked, raising a brow. "No," she said, her eyes fixed on his in the mirror. "As someone I need to understand." Samuel didn't ask for clarification. He only nodded slightly. That was all he needed. For the first time, Victoria Harrington had met a man she couldn't categorize or control. And she hated it. The next morning, Samuel Hills walked through the revolving doors of Harrington Global not as a driver, but as someone summoned to understand the inner workings of the company. His steps were steady, measured, unhurried. He carried no briefcase, no laptop, nothing to prove his worth. Yet in every movement, he radiated confidence, and everyone who saw him noticed. Alicia Grant greeted him at the elevator. "Ms. Harrington asked that you meet her in the boardroom directly. She says you're to observe for now, and speak only when asked." Samuel nodded. Understood. As the elevator ascended, he glanced out at the city waking beneath him. The streets of Manhattan seemed to pulse with a rhythm only he could anticipate. Today, he realized, was more than just a day of observation. It was the start of something far larger than anyone in the office could see. Victoria Harrington sat at the head of the long mahogany table, eyes scanning a sea of anxious executives. Mark Reynolds flinched as she entered the room, clearly unsettled by her expression. "Samuel Hills," Victoria announced, her tone flat but commanding. "Observe, and speak only if your insights are requested. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." He took a seat at the end of the table, not in the driver's chair at the back, but with the executives. His presence alone changed the energy in the room. People shifted uncomfortably, some frowning, others whispering. The meeting began with updates on the San Francisco crisis. Engineers stumbled over technical jargon, blaming miscommunication, legacy code, and unforeseen system variables. Victoria listened, her hands folded, her jaw tight. Samuel noticed immediately where the explanations were incomplete. He could see the gaps, the assumptions that no one dared question, and the flaws that had caused the failure in the first place. Victoria paused mid-sentence as Samuel spoke. His voice was calm, precise, unassuming yet full of authority. "If I may," he said, "the data corruption appears to stem from a queue management issue during parallel processing. The legacy servers and AI integration layer aren't properly synchronized. Any simultaneous transaction in the system triggers a feedback loop that corrupts the output." The room froze. Mark Reynolds looked alarmed. How do you know that?" Samuel didn't answer immediately. He turned to Victoria. "I've reviewed the logs and system behavior. This pattern is familiar. It's consistent with the failures we're observing. Correcting the queue prioritization and isolating the legacy nodes should prevent further data loss." Victoria's eyes narrowed. For the first time, she felt that electric mixture of surprise and intrigue. No one else had come close. "You've observed carefully," she said slowly. "I have," he replied. "You're not just a driver," she said under her breath. "No," Samuel admitted. The other executives were stunned, their mouths opening and closing like fish out of water. Some tried to mask it with forced professionalism, others with disbelief. One senior engineer finally spoke. Are you saying this driver can solve what we couldn't? Samuel's expression remained neutral. I'm saying the problem can be solved, yes. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. She did not correct him, though she wanted to. She studied him closely, analyzing every micro-expression, every choice of word. Something had shifted. Later that afternoon, Samuel returned to the SUV. Victoria followed, but she didn't speak immediately. She sat quietly, staring out the window as Manhattan's skyline reflected the dying sunlight. "Do you always answer so calmly?" she asked. "Yes," he said simply. Calm observation precedes effective action. Her eyebrows rose. She looked at him carefully. He was handsome, yes, but that wasn't it. It was the intelligence, the quiet confidence, the way he didn't need to prove himself. No one in her life had ever faced her like that. No one had challenged her assumptions without fear. She realized something dangerous: admiration. And with admiration often came something worse: curiosity about what he might truly be capable of. Over the next week, Samuel continued his subtle interventions. He suggested minor efficiency changes that saved hours of work, identified overlooked issues in the San Francisco integration without taking credit, quietly corrected staff miscommunications before they escalated. Victoria couldn't ignore it. The employees whispered, the board noticed, but only she understood the full scope. Samuel Hills was not only competent, he was brilliant. Late one evening, she found herself standing at the top of her office tower, gazing at the city lights. She thought about the man who drove her every day, the man who had just walked into her world and quietly taken control of things no one else could. "Who are you, really?" she whispered to herself. She didn't realize she was speaking not just to him, but to herself, to the part of her that had longed for a challenge she could not dominate. By the end of that week, Samuel had done more than just observe. He had earned a place in her mind, perhaps even her trust. And for Victoria Harrington, that was dangerous, because she had never let anyone close. She had never relied on anyone. She had never allowed herself to be surprised by anyone's competence or brilliance. Samuel Hills had changed all of that. And Victoria Harrington, the woman who fired every driver in under a month, realized with an uneasy thrill that she might have just met the first man she couldn't control. The first man who might change everything. The morning light cut through the glass towers of New York City, sharp and unrelenting, much like Victoria Harrington herself. But Samuel Hills had long since learned to move through her world not with force, but with quiet observation. Today, that observation would become action. The San Francisco integration crisis was far from resolved. Live data corruption had spread through 5 states, threatening major clients, and investors were calling every hour. The engineers at Harrington Global had tried and failed to locate the problem. The COO, Mark Reynolds, had begun to look pale and distracted, and the board members were losing patience. Victoria stood at the head of the boardroom, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like a predator. She was furious, but not out of anger alone. She was furious because no one in her company had the capability or the intelligence to solve this problem. Samuel Hills, seated quietly at the end of the table, observed. He did not fidget, he did not speak. He merely watched and listened, processing every word, every hesitation, every flawed assumption. "Do we have any updates?" Victoria asked, voice clipped and sharp. One of the engineers, a young man named Eric, stammered. "We were still troubleshooting. The legacy nodes and the AI layer are conflicting in ways we didn't anticipate. We think. Victoria's voice cut through the air like a knife. "I am paying all of you handsomely to know, not to think." The room grew silent. Even Mark Reynolds shrank slightly in his chair. Samuel finally spoke, calm, precise, unwavering. "If I may, ma'am." All eyes turned toward him. Victoria's gaze, sharp as ever, pinned him in place. "Go ahead." "The data corruption," Samuel began, "stems from a synchronization conflict between the legacy servers and the new AI processing layer. When multiple nodes attempt to process simultaneous transactions, the system triggers a feedback loop that corrupts incoming data. Standard stress tests would not have caught this unless the parallel processing load exceeded the predicted maximum, which it did during the recent rollout. He paused, letting the words sink in. Correcting the queue prioritization and isolating the legacy nodes during high-load operations should prevent further corruption. A patch applied in real time will stabilize the system. The room froze. Mark Reynolds coughed, trying to regain control. Samuel, you're saying a driver can solve what our senior engineers couldn't. Samuel met his gaze evenly. I'm saying the problem can be solved, yes. It's a matter of method, not luck. Victoria leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. Something inside her stirred. Recognition. Respect. Perhaps even curiosity. You've observed carefully, she said, almost imperceptibly. I have, Samuel replied. And you're not just a driver. No. Her lips pressed together. For the first time, Victoria Harrington found herself uncertain. Samuel Hills had entered her world and challenged her assumptions with quiet authority, and she didn't know how to respond. Later that evening, the boardroom emptied. Victoria and Samuel remained, the air thick with tension. Why are you here, Samuel Hills? She asked, tone low and guarded. To solve problems, he replied simply. You're a driver, she said, though the words sounded inadequate even to her own ears. Yes, he admitted. But I am also someone who has studied, observed, and applied knowledge that most assume is irrelevant to this position. I did not come here to drive because I needed to impress anyone. I came here to do what is necessary, and to observe a system that was failing due to misalignment. Victoria studied him. He spoke without arrogance, without condescension, without expectation. And for the first time, she felt something unfamiliar. Respect. Real, dangerous respect. Victoria's curiosity got the better of her. That evening, she instructed HR to run a full background check on Samuel Hills. The results arrived faster than she anticipated. MIT Bachelor of Science, Systems Engineering. Stanford MBA, Business Strategy. Former systems architect at a Fortune 100 tech firm. Multiple patents in AI optimization. Victoria read the report twice. She had hired him as a driver. A driver. And yet, he was more qualified than nearly anyone in her executive team. When she confronted him privately, she didn't know whether to be angry, impressed, or unsettled. Why are you driving for me? She asked, voice low. I wanted to step back from corporate politics, Samuel said evenly. I wanted to see a company run in its natural state. And, frankly, I wanted to see the real leader behind Harrington Global. You. Victoria's eyes narrowed. She had never had anyone speak to her like that. Never anyone who implied she had depth, yet challenged her at the same time. Samuel was given temporary access to the system. Within hours, he implemented the patch he had outlined. The data corruption stopped. Shipments resumed. Clients were reassured. The board and executives looked stunned. Victoria stood in the server room beside him, watching the system stabilize in real time. You did this, she said softly. Yes, Samuel replied, calm as ever. You didn't just drive the car, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You drove the company out of a disaster. For the first time, Victoria Harrington felt a pang of something she rarely admitted, admiration. And perhaps something else, more dangerous. Curiosity about the man who had so quietly and completely proven himself. Weeks later, Harrington Global hosted a gala in San Francisco, inviting investors, clients, and tech media. Samuel accompanied Victoria, seated beside her at dinner, not as a driver, but as someone she had personally vouched for. During a toast, a board member smirked. Of course, we couldn't have managed without the driver, he said with a slight, mocking emphasis. Victoria froze. She opened her mouth to defend Samuel, but stopped herself. Later, in the quiet of her suite, Samuel leaned against the window, looking at the lights of the city. I won't stay where I'm not respected, he said quietly. Victoria's chest tightened. She realized, suddenly, that she didn't want him to leave. For the first time in her life, Victoria Harrington faced a truth she couldn't control. There was a man in her life who refused to be underestimated. Samuel Hills was not a driver. He was a challenge. He was brilliant. And he was indispensable. And for Victoria, who had always wielded control like a weapon, this was dangerous. Because she had never let anyone get this close. And now, she couldn't imagine letting him go. The skyline of New York City glimmered beneath the setting sun, golden streaks reflecting off glass towers. Victoria Harrington stood at the edge of her office floor, arms crossed, watching the city breathe. Below, the streets moved in organized chaos, a rhythm she once thought she controlled entirely. But Samuel Hills had changed all of that. He wasn't just her driver. He wasn't just a consultant or a problem solver. He was a man who refused to be underestimated. And for the first time in her life, Victoria felt something entirely unfamiliar: vulnerability. After the gala in San Francisco, Samuel had pulled back. He had noticed her hesitation when the board member belittled him, and he would not tolerate half measures of respect. For 2 weeks, Samuel kept a professional distance. He continued his work in the office, his brilliance visible, but he avoided personal interaction unless necessary. Victoria, unused to being challenged or to being ignored, felt the first pangs of frustration she had never allowed herself to feel. Late one night, alone in her office, she found herself staring at the empty chair where he usually sat during strategy meetings. "I could lose him," she whispered to herself, a chill running down her spine. "And I wouldn't know how to get him back." Samuel submitted his resignation quietly, leaving a note on her desk. "I cannot work where I am not fully respected. I have done my best. It is your choice to meet me halfway or lose me entirely." Victoria read it 3 times. Her heart, usually so armored, beat faster than it had in years. She realized she had underestimated him. Not just underestimated his skill, but underestimated the quiet authority he commanded simply by being himself. Samuel returned to the office the following morning to collect his belongings. Victoria met him in the hall, her heels clicking sharply against marble. "Samuel," she said, voice steady but carrying an edge of emotion she rarely showed. "Wait." He paused, hands in his pockets, calm as ever. I misjudged you," she admitted, words carefully chosen. "Not just your ability, but everything. I assumed I could control everything, including you. I can't. And that terrifies me." Samuel looked at her, reading the subtle vulnerability in her posture. "Respect is not control," he said. "It is acknowledgement. You give it freely, or you lose it." Victoria swallowed. She had never admitted weakness to anyone. Not her board, not her investors, not even her family. Yet here she was, standing before a man who refused to let her underestimate him. "I don't want to lose you," she confessed. Victoria immediately called a board meeting. "Samuel Hills," she announced, voice firm, "will join Harrington Global Systems as Chief Strategy Officer. His insights have saved this company. If anyone has an issue with that, you can speak to me personally." The room fell silent. Mark Reynolds looked stunned. Some board members whispered in disbelief. But Victoria stood firm, unwavering. Samuel Hills had earned his place, and she would not allow anyone to diminish him. With Samuel officially part of the company leadership, the dynamic between him and Victoria evolved. Late-night strategy sessions became personal conversations. He challenged her worldview, gently, without ego. She shared parts of her life she rarely revealed: childhood ambitions, fears of failure, the loneliness of success. They discovered a rhythm of mutual respect, admiration, and attraction. Each interaction was a test, not of power, but of vulnerability. And slowly, walls that Victoria had built over decades began to crumble. A sudden crisis emerged. A competitor attempted a hostile tech acquisition, threatening Harrington Global's market position. For the first time, Victoria and Samuel faced a challenge not separately, but together. Every decision, every strategy, every move was a partnership. By the time the boardroom erupted with panic, Samuel and Victoria had already anticipated every countermeasure, every market response, every possible outcome. The company emerged stronger. Investors praised the leadership. The media lauded Harrington Global Systems for stability and ingenuity. And in the quiet afterward, Victoria and Samuel shared a moment of understanding. They had faced chaos together and had prevailed as equals. A week later, Samuel asked Victoria to meet him on the rooftop of her office tower. The city lights shimmered beneath them. "I've waited long enough," he said quietly. "Not just for you to respect me, but for you to trust me. And now I want more. Victoria Harrington, will you marry me?" Victoria's eyes widened. She laughed softly, a sound she rarely allowed herself. "You me?" she whispered, heart pounding. "Yes," he said. "Not as someone to control or manage. Not as a challenge or a puzzle. But as a partner. Equally. Fully. Honestly." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely seen. "Yes," she said, deliberately, intentionally. "Yes." They embraced, the skyline of New York glowing around them. Victoria Harrington, who had once believed no one could meet her standards, had finally found the man who refused to be underestimated, and who loved her anyway. Samuel Hills was no longer the driver. He was a partner, an equal, and a force that challenged Victoria in ways that made her stronger, better, and, dare she admit it, happier. Victoria Harrington, the woman who had fired every driver in under a month, had met the one man who could not be driven, except by love. And she wouldn't have it any other way. 5 years had passed since Samuel Hills had stepped into Victoria Harrington's life and turned it upside down. Harrington Global Systems had grown exponentially, its market share solidified, and its innovations recognized worldwide. Samuel, once a driver, now held the title of Chief Strategy Officer, a role he had earned not by charm or influence, but by intellect, integrity, and relentless precision. Investors, engineers, and board members alike spoke of him with respect, often in awe. Victoria Harrington, once feared as a cold, unapproachable billionaire, had changed in ways that were subtle yet profound. Her sharp edges remained, but her leadership had softened, tempered by trust and the understanding that true strength didn't mean controlling everything or everyone. Their wedding had been private, held in a modern estate on the outskirts of New York City. Only a handful of friends, family, and close colleagues attended. There were no grand announcements, no social media spectacle. Just two people who had built a bond from respect, admiration, and shared challenges. Victoria wore a sleek, minimalistic gown, her hair pulled back to highlight the sharpness of her features softened by joy. Samuel looked effortlessly elegant in his tailored suit, calm and confident as always. "I never thought I'd meet someone who refuses to be underestimated," Victoria whispered to him during the ceremony. "And yet here we are," Samuel replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Neither of us underestimated the other. They held hands, fully equal, fully present, fully committed. In the years that followed, their partnership flourished both personally and professionally. They co-led Harrington Global through the launch of an AI-powered logistics platform that set a new global standard. Samuel continued mentoring engineers and executives, quietly transforming company culture into one of collaboration, respect, and innovation. Victoria embraced a new level of empathy in her leadership, balancing her ambition with trust and humanity. Evenings often found them in their penthouse overlooking Manhattan, reviewing strategies or simply enjoying silence together. Rare moments where neither had to perform, impress, or command. They laughed, they argued, and they challenged each other constantly, but always with respect. Samuel Hills had once entered her life as just a driver, but he had become so much more, a partner, a confidant, and the man who reshaped her understanding of strength, love, and trust. Victoria Harrington had once believed that every person around her was incompetent, replaceable, or insufficient. Samuel had taught her that true partnership was not about control. It was about respect, equality, and seeing someone for who they truly were. Together, they had built not just a successful company, but a life filled with admiration, love, and shared vision. Victoria often reflected on the irony. The woman who fired every driver within a month had married the one man who refused to be controlled, and who had shown her that the most valuable thing a person could ever offer was not compliance or subservience, but integrity, intelligence, and heart. And Samuel, who had once taken a simple driver's position for observation and reflection, had found more than career redemption. He had found a life, a love, and a partnership that neither of them would ever underestimate again. In the end, it wasn't power, wealth, or control that defined them. It was respect. And in that respect, they had built an empire and a life unshakable. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe to Boundless Echoes for more interesting stories. We really appreciate your support. Comment where you are watching from, so we can give you a shout out. See you in our next video.